In the cold winter of 1851, a schoolteacher named Elizabeth Hartwell stumbled upon something deeply disturbing beneath St. Catherine's Academy for Young Ladies. While exploring what appeared to be an unused basement storage room, she uncovered a hidden chamber concealed behind a false wall. Inside were 24 small beds, each one outfitted with rusted iron restraints fastened to the headboards. Resting beside every bed was a single, worn object, a broken doll, a tattered ribbon, a tiny wooden cross. And on the wall, scribbled in what looked like the shaky handwriting of a frightened child, were the chilling words, "We are still here." Elizabeth's written account of the discovery was swiftly buried by Massachusetts officials, vanishing from all public record. It wasn't until 1987, more than a century later, that her testimony resurfaced, found by renovation workers inside a sealed mason jar hidden behind the altar of the Academy's chapel. What they uncovered about the fate of those 24 missing girls would unearth one of New England's darkest and most fiercely guarded secrets. A secret 3 women posing as nuns were willing to kill to keep hidden. Before we go deeper into what truly happened at St. Catherine's Academy, you should know, this isn't your typical story. This space is only for those who are willing to confront the shadowy truths that history tried to erase. If you think you're ready to learn what really happened behind those brick walls in Massachusetts, tap subscribe and turn on notifications. And drop a comment telling us what state you're watching from. Are you bold enough to continue? To understand what happened to those girls, we first have to look back at how a place meant for safety became something else entirely. A place of nightmares. The year was 1834. Massachusetts was undergoing rapid change as factories and railroads drove the Industrial Revolution forward. Cities like Boston and Worcester were booming, but the prosperity came at a cost. A rising number of parentless children, left behind by death, disease, or industrial tragedies. Salem, already haunted by its infamous witch trial legacy, was no stranger to suspicion and religious extremism. While the trials were long in the past, the town's deeply religious population, guided by Congregationalist traditions, continued to cast a wary eye on anything that didn't conform. It was in this setting of strict piety that St. Catherine's Academy for Young Ladies opened its doors. Located on Gallows Hill Road, an unsettlingly ironic address, the Academy was established in a towering brick mansion once owned by a wealthy trader. Its Gothic revival style, with sharp rooftops and narrow, towering windows, gave it an imposing yet dignified appearance. On the surface, the school promised a safe haven for orphaned girls between the ages of 12 and 17. Glossy pamphlets distributed throughout the Northeast spoke of lessons in etiquette, excellence in homemaking, and spiritual growth, all preparing the girls for placement in respectable Christian homes. Parents who had succumbed to illnesses like tuberculosis and cholera, or had perished in factory accidents, were told their daughters would be raised in love, faith, and order at St. Catherine's. At the center of the institution stood Mother Superior Victoria Whitman. She was tall, commanding, and strict, her silver hair tightly bound beneath a black veil, her presence sharp and unyielding. With an upper-class Bostonian accent and polished speech, she claimed a prestigious education from Mount Holyoke and a history of charitable work in Irish Catholic orphanages. She described her work at St. Catherine's as a divine mission to protect and shape the future of lost girls. Alongside her was Sister Margaret Collins, the gentle heart of the trio. Soft-spoken, with warm eyes and a lilting Irish accent, she taught music and literature. Many of the girls, still grieving the loss of their parents, quickly grew attached to her kindness. She seemed to offer something rare in their world: affection without condition. The third and most rigid member of the leadership was Sister Agnes Murphy. She handled everything from adoptions and finances to the girls' rigorous daily schedules. Her demeanor was cold and no nonsense. She kept Immaculate Records ran the academy like a military operation and tolerated no disobedience. The spotless black of her habit and the constant presence of her rosary gave her an air of severe devotion to the townspeople of Salem. St. Catherine's seemed like a godsend. It solved a humanitarian crisis that neither the Protestant churches nor the local government had the means to handle. Despite their reservations about Catholic influence, ministers and town leaders praised the academy's mission. Even the mayor gave a glowing speech at the school's dedication ceremony, calling Mother Superior Whitman a pillar of Christian mercy. The girls who entered St. Catherine's came from all over the region. 13-year-old Mary O'Brien had lost her family in a textile factory blaze in Lowell. 15-year-old Sarah Thompson's parents had succumbed to an influenza outbreak that swept through their tenement building in Springfield. Others had similar tragic stories, each one a girl alone in the world, sent to a place they were told would offer peace, guidance, and safety. But that's not what they found. Not at all. ***, orphaned by the cruel grip of tuberculosis that swept through her crowded Boston tenement. Young Catherine Murphy, unrelated to Sister Agnes, found herself alone. She was just 12 when tragedy struck again. Her father perished in a railway accident, and her mother, overwhelmed by poverty, was forced to surrender her care. Like so many others, Catherine arrived at St. Catherine's Academy with nothing but a tattered bundle and frightened eyes. Every girl who came through those doors was greeted with the same rehearsed kindness. A warm meal, a freshly made bed, and a solemn vow of hope. They were promised an education to shape them into refined young women, capable of becoming teachers, governesses, or wives of upright Christian men. Most significantly, the nuns vowed that by the time they turned 18, each girl would be placed with a reputable family, where she would have opportunities her birth circumstances could never offer. Daily life at the academy followed a strict, but outwardly noble regimen. The girls awoke at dawn for prayer, then spent their days learning to read, write, and master arithmetic. Lessons in needlework, housekeeping, and basic cooking followed, along with moral instruction designed to shape them into dignified Christian ladies. Dressed in plain gray frocks with white aprons, their hair pulled neatly back, they moved quietly through the halls like shadows of obedience to outsiders. The academy looked precisely like the sanctuary it claimed to be. The rare guests allowed beyond its doors saw neat classrooms, silent dormitories, and diligent young girls under the watchful care of pious women who had renounced earthly pleasures to serve the Lord's will. When pastors or city officials visited, they were shown only what the Mother Superior wanted them to see. But there were layers the public never glimpsed. No one was allowed access to the third floor, allegedly used for storage, nor to the basement. Workshop where, according to the nuns, the girls practiced advanced domestic skills. That room was always mysteriously vacant during visits. Over time, more and more girls arrived at the academy. Yet, curiously, no one seemed to leave. Girls who had been there for years remained the same age. There were no letters, no visitors from families they had supposedly joined, no alumni returning to express gratitude or share success stories. For 17 years, not one girl placed with a family ever reappeared. The first crack in the academy's carefully built illusion didn't come from within its walls. It came from an ordinary woman named Emma Prescott, a seamstress working in Boston's North End. On a bitter February morning in 1843, nearly a decade after the academy first opened, Emma was walking to work through the icy streets near the harbor. As she passed a narrow alley between two buildings, a haunting melody floated down to her. A child's voice, singing a lullaby she hadn't heard in years. She froze. That tune had belonged to Mary O'Brien, a friend from the textile mill where they'd once labored side by side. Mary had vanished after her parents died in a fire. The nuns had taken her in, promising she'd soon be placed with a family in the countryside. Emma's feet carried her toward the sound. It was coming from the upper floor of a building she recognized all too well, one known in the city as a house of ill repute. The window on the second floor was draped in heavy velvet curtains, but a narrow gap offered a fleeting glimpse. What she saw sent a chill through her soul. A girl stood by the window, dressed in silk too fine for someone so young. Her dark hair was styled in intricate curls, her lips painted, her bearing strangely elegant for a 16-year-old. But it wasn't the clothes that shook Emma. It was the face. She knew that face. It was Mary. Changed, older, hardened perhaps, but unmistakably Mary O'Brien. And Mary was never meant to end up here. Emma found herself paralyzed in that narrow alleyway, staring at the back of a young girl who seemed worlds apart from the modest, quiet orphan she once knew. What unsettled her the most, though, were the girl's eyes. They were vacant, distant, carrying a weight no child should have to bear. For several long minutes, Emma remained still, trying to convince herself she had made a mistake. But then came the lullaby, soft, haunting, and unmistakably Mary's voice. Eventually, Emma mustered the courage to approach the front entrance of the building. A large, intimidating man answered the door and made it clear, without needing to say much, that this was no place for a decent woman to be lingering. That night, shaken but determined, Emma penned a letter addressed to Mary O'Brien at St. Catherine's Academy. She wrote with warmth, expressing her hope that Mary was doing well, and casually mentioned she thought she'd spotted her in Boston, wondering if Mary might be in the city visiting. Emma expected a comforting response, maybe even a letter from Mary herself, assuring her that all was well. Instead, what arrived a week later left her cold. The letter came from Sister Agnes Murphy. It was polite, but it did little to ease Emma's concern. According to the sister, Mary had been placed with a devout family in western Massachusetts over 2 years ago. The family, she explained, had requested privacy and preferred that Mary not maintain contact with anyone from her past. Sister Agnes insisted Mary was happy and flourishing in her new life. The letter was stiff, deliberately conclusive, clearly meant to close the door on any further communication. But Emma noticed something strange. Years of working as a seamstress had given her a meticulous eye, and she was certain that the handwriting in the body of the letter didn't match the signature. The tone might have been Sister Hans's, but someone else had likely signed her name in haste. Emma might have pushed the incident from her mind until another encounter made that impossible. 3 months later, while browsing the stalls at Faneuil Hall, she noticed a well-dressed man escorting a young girl toward a carriage. The girl was no more than 14, with freckles and soft brown hair. Emma's heart skipped. She looked exactly like Sarah Thompson, another girl from the academy, who was also said to have been adopted into a good family. But the girl's appearance didn't match what Emma would expect of a child from a respectable home. Though finely dressed, her outfit was far too suggestive for someone so young, more in line with the fashion Emma had seen on the women working the seedier districts by the harbor. Even more disturbing were the girl's eyes. Hollow, defeated, mirroring the same haunted expression Emma had seen in Mary. Emma tried to get closer, but the man, distinguished, likely in his 50s, and clearly someone of means, hurried the girl into the carriage. Before Emma could reach them, the door slammed shut. As the carriage pulled away, the girl turned to the window, her eyes locking briefly with Emma's. In that fleeting moment, Emma saw something that sent a chill through her body. Silent desperation, a plea for help trapped behind fear. That night, Emma made up her mind. She wrote again to St. Catherine's Academy, this time with pointed questions, no longer masking her concern behind pleasantries. She wanted answers, and she was prepared to uncover the truth, no matter the risk. Emma Prescott had recently glimpsed both Mary and Sarah on the streets of Boston, and unsettled by their appearance, wrote to Sister Agnes, asking for details about their placements. She also requested permission to visit the academy, hoping to gather information on other girls she had once known. But it wasn't Sister Agnes who replied. Instead, a letter arrived from Mother Superior Whitman herself. The tone was calm and courteous, but the message carried an unmistakable threat. Mother Superior explained that Emma's inquiries were upsetting to the girls who had, in her words, moved on and found contentment in their new lives. She subtly accused Emma of allowing her imagination to run wild, of mistaking strangers for familiar faces. She recommended, in no uncertain terms, that Emma concern herself with her own affairs rather than dig into matters long settled. Final lines of the letter echoed in Emma's thoughts long after she read them. Young women who involve themselves in affairs beyond their concern often find their reputations and safety at risk. I trust a wise girl like yourself will recognize the importance of letting sleeping dogs lie. Emma understood exactly what the letter meant. She was being warned to stop firmly and clearly. But in her gut, she knew she had stumbled onto something far more disturbing than any misunderstanding. These girls had not been placed with loving Christian families. Their presence in grim, unsettling places told a different story. One Emma feared was part of something much darker. What haunted her most was the question of how many other girls had vanished in the same way. And what could she do, alone and unprotected, without placing herself in grave danger? Had events not begun to unravel later that same year, her suspicions might have remained, just that annoying doubt buried in her conscience. But in the fall of 1847, certain developments exposed the scale of what was truly happening. By then, St. Catherine's Academy had been running for over a decade. Mother Superior Whitman had earned a glowing reputation throughout Salem and beyond. She often spoke at churches, preaching about the moral obligation to care for orphaned girls, presenting herself as a beacon of compassion and virtue. But the growing success of the institution made Whitman and her associates reckless. What had started as a secretive, small-scale arrangement had evolved into a far-reaching and dangerous enterprise. The academy had become a hub not for adoption, but for supplying girls to a network that extended from Boston to New York. Some girls were funneled into brothels. Others were handed off to wealthy collectors, whose true intentions were never questioned. The operation continued without disruption until one decision proved to be a critical misstep. In October 1847, a man named Cornelius Blackwood approached the academy. He presented himself as a well-to-do gentleman seeking a companion for his ailing wife, someone gentle, quiet, and attentive. He claimed to live in the rural outskirts of western Massachusetts and offered a payment that was 5 times higher than the usual adoption donation. Not everything about Blackwood's story was dubious. His expensive clothing, polished manner, and refined speech hinted at a life far removed from the countryside. He spoke vaguely about his wife's condition and offered no clear explanation of his home or needs. Most suspicious of all, he insisted on interviewing the girls privately, citing his wife's fragile health as the reason for such secrecy. Any genuine institution with moral integrity would have declined. But Mother Superior Whitman saw only profit. She presented him with 3 candidates: Catherine Murphy, aged 15, Elizabeth Porter, 14, and Hannah Clark, 16. Each girl was noted for her beauty and obedience traits that, in the Academy's real business, made them especially marketable. What Whitman failed to realize, however, was that Cornelius Blackwood was not who he claimed to be. The man going by the name Blackwood was in fact Detective Inspector William Ashworth from the Boston Police Department. He had been working undercover for months on a case that began when the body of a young woman was discovered in Boston Harbor. In the summer of 1847, the victim, around 18 years old with dark hair and delicate features, appeared to have once lived a life of care and comfort. What caught Ashworth's attention was the unusual tattoo on her wrist, a simple cross above the letters SC. This wasn't the first time Ashworth had come across such markings. Similar symbols had appeared on other young women found dead under suspicious circumstances, often linked to prostitution. But these tattoos seemed amateur, not the work of a professional. More importantly, the initials hinted at a possible connection to an institution. Not just the streets. His investigation led him deep into the underworld of Boston, a hidden network of brothels and elite private clubs catering to wealthy clients with dark appetites. What he uncovered was an organized operation that supplied young girls to men who paid dearly for what they referred to as fresh inventory. These weren't typical street girls. They were well-educated and trained to meet the expectations of Boston's upper-class dot. As Ashworth combed through old case files and missing person reports, a pattern started to emerge. Over the past 13 years, dozens of girls had vanished from across Massachusetts. These weren't troubled runaways, but girls who had been placed in what were believed to be respectable institutions or adoptive homes. After being placed, they simply disappeared. No contact, no records, no trace. The one institution that repeatedly appeared in connection to these missing girls was St. Catherine's Academy. Many of the girls had once been under its care, and all leads ended in silence. Letters stopped, no marriage or death certificates were found. It was as if these young women had been wiped from the world. Ashworth infiltrated St. Catherine's Academy under a false identity to gather concrete proof of his suspicions that this seemingly holy institution was a front for a well-structured trafficking ring. What he discovered during his meeting with the Academy's head, Mother Superior Whitman, was worse than he had imagined. In a private conversation held in the parlor, Whitman spoke without hesitation about the features that increased a girl's value. She talked about youth, obedience, and the girl's total reliance on the Academy for everything. She hinted that any client's preferences could be catered to, as long as the payment was sufficient. When Ashworth requested to meet some of the girls, Whitman didn't take him to the usual dormitories. Instead, she led him to a separate, unfamiliar section of the building. This wing was unlike the rest, richly furnished with silk curtains, ornate furniture, and a distinct air of luxury that didn't belong in a place meant to shelter orphans. 3 girls were presented to him, dressed in fashionable clothing far too lavish for their supposed background. Their hair had been carefully styled, their faces painted subtly to enhance their beauty. What disturbed Ashworth most was their behavior. They had clearly been trained to act in ways designed to attract and please adult men. It was clear to him that they had been groomed deliberately for sexual exploitation. But the most chilling moment came as Ashworth was preparing to leave. Through a window in another part of the building, a section Whitman had not shown him, he glimpsed a workshop where other young girls were hard at work. Unlike the polished girls he had just met, these ones looked weary and broken, silently laboring under the sharp gaze of Sister Agnes Murphy. It was then Ashworth understood that the Academy operated on multiple fronts. Some girls were primed for elite clients, given preferential treatment, trained and styled. Others were kept for menial labor within the Academy. And some, he feared, were discarded completely when they were no longer useful. Now came the hard part, building a legal case against women who had spent over a decade cultivating the image of devoted nuns. They were respected within religious circles, admired by officials, and shielded by the perceived nobility of their work. But Ashworth had a critical ally, Emma Prescott. Emma had finally mustered the courage to go to the police with her suspicions. Her account, combined with what Ashworth had observed undercover, formed the beginnings of a case that could unveil one of New England's darkest secrets. Still, testimony and suspicion weren't enough. He needed undeniable proof and brave witnesses. That posed a massive challenge. The entire operation had been constructed to eliminate evidence and silence those involved. Many who might have spoken out had vanished, and the few survivors were too frightened to come forward. Then, unexpectedly, help arrived from a new direction. A man named Dr. Nathaniel Webb. Detective Ashworth uncovered a dark and disturbing truth about St. Catherine's Academy. Centered around a physician named Dr. Webb. Known for his professionalism and discretion, Dr. Webb had long been the trusted medical examiner for the Academy. However, Ashworth's investigation revealed that the doctor's silence was bought. His records showed excessive payments from the institution, far beyond standard medical fees. Dr. Webb's association with the Academy began in 1836, just 2 years after its establishment. His first case involved a 14-year-old girl with injuries unmistakably caused by a brutal assault. He treated her and was generously compensated to keep quiet. Over the years, he was repeatedly summoned to tend to other girls with similar wounds. Clear signs of abuse. Some had contracted illnesses that could only have come from repeated exploitation, while others bore the consequences of unsafe, illegal procedures. The doctor had meticulously documented each case, partly out of professional duty and partly to protect himself if the truth ever surfaced. These records, obtained by Ashworth through a legal warrant, exposed a horrifying pattern of exploitation spanning over a decade. The girls at St. Catherine's were subjected to relentless violence, infected with diseases, and forced into dangerous situations that left many permanently injured or worse. Even more shocking, Dr. Webb's files included the names of the men who delivered these girls to him. They weren't adoptive families, as the Academy publicly claimed, but rather wealthy, influential figures, businessmen, judges, clergy, and even high-ranking officials. Among them was Judge Harrison Cromwell, known for condemning moral crimes, while secretly participating in them. Reverend Samuel Blackstone, a vocal advocate for childhood innocence, was also implicated, along with Boston's own Mayor Robert Thornton, who had publicly praised the Academy's charitable work. Ashworth realized this was no isolated operation, but a vast network of powerful men using their status to prey on the defenseless. The deeper he dug, the more sinister the case became. Many of the girls Dr. Webb treated never returned for follow-up care. When questioned, the Academy claimed they had recovered and been placed with new families. But Ashworth suspected a far darker fate. His suspicions led him to investigate the Academy's building under the guise of a routine inspection. In the basement, he uncovered a hidden world. One section served as a makeshift medical room, another as a workshop where the girls were forced to labor. A third area appeared to be a training space for those being groomed for special clients. But the most horrifying discovery lay behind a concealed wall, a crude crematorium. Inside were charred bone fragments and teeth, later confirmed to belong to multiple young girls, some showing signs of fatal trauma or advanced disease. This grisly find provided the evidence Ashworth needed. St. Catherine's Academy wasn't just a place of abuse, it was a graveyard for those who had outlived their usefulness to the men who controlled it. The case exposed a conspiracy of corruption, exploitation, and murder, reaching into the highest levels of society. Now Ashworth had the proof to bring the entire operation crashing down. Detective Ashworth had uncovered a chilling truth. The final destination of young girls who had become a liability to St. Catherine's Academy. These were girls who had suffered so much abuse that they could no longer serve the Academy's dark purpose. Some had shown signs of speaking out, others had simply outlasted their value. Each one had been silenced permanently. Their lives were ended, and their remains destroyed to erase any proof they had ever existed. But the most gut-wrenching revelation came from a concealed compartment near the cremation chamber. There, Ashworth discovered a ledger and exhaustive record of the Academy's horrific dealings over the course of 13 years. The ledger listed the names of clients, the money they paid, and disturbingly precise descriptions of the services rendered. It also documented each girl who had been retired, a euphemism for over 40 murdered victims, discarded when they were deemed no longer beneficial. Shockingly, the ledger bore the signatures of the 3 women who had run the Academy Mother: Superior Victoria Whitman, Sister Margaret Collins, and Sister Agnes Murphy. But there was a 4th name as well: Father Patrick Ollie. He had long been assumed to be the priest who had helped establish the institution under the guise of Catholic benevolence. In truth, he was no priest at all, just another impostor who had inserted himself into the operation to lend it a veneer of spiritual authority. With this damning evidence in hand, Ashworth realized he had exposed not just a handful of criminals, but a deeply entrenched network of wealthy and influential men who had abused their positions to exploit defenseless girls. But gathering the evidence, as difficult as it had been, was not the real danger. Bringing these men to justice, that would be the true test. As Ashworth prepared to deliver his findings to the Attorney General of Massachusetts, a new, sobering awareness took hold. The very reason St. Catherine's had operated without scrutiny for so long was now staring him in the face. Many of the institution's clients held immense power. These were men with the means to suppress problems before they ever reached public ears. The first warning sign came subtly. Ashworth was summoned to a meeting with his commanding officer, Captain Thomas Brennan. What was meant to be a standard case update quickly turned into something else. Brennan, usually steadfast in his support, now seemed uneasy, his tone distant, his words cautiously chosen. "I've gone through your reports, Detective," Brennan began, not looking Ashworth in the eye. "And I have to say, I'm concerned you're pushing too far. You're leveling some very serious charges against highly regarded individuals." Ashworth was taken aback. "Captain, the evidence is conclusive. We have documentation, physical proof of murder. These women have been trafficking children for over a decade." "Evidence can be misleading," Brennan replied, his voice flat. "What might look criminal could just be administrative carelessness, misunderstandings. I'm advising you to tread carefully." That night, Ashworth's suspicions were confirmed. When an unexpected visitor arrived at his home, Judge Harrison Cromwell. The judge's name had appeared repeatedly in the medical logs maintained by Dr. Webb, linking him directly to the Academy. Cromwell wasn't alone. He brought 2 men who clearly weren't legal officials. Without invitation, Cromwell made himself comfortable in Ashworth's home, his tone calm yet unmistakably firm. "Detective," the judge began, "you've earned a reputation for diligence and integrity. That's why I believe you'll appreciate the sensitivity of what I'm about to say." He paused, scanning the room before continuing. "Your investigation is starting to unsettle important figures in this city. Influential people. People who don't want to see their names dragged into scandal, especially over matters that are, let's say, open to interpretation." Ashworth didn't respond. Cromwell didn't expect him to. "This is the kind of situation," the judge added, "where a wise man chooses discretion over valor, and a loyal officer considers the long-term health of his career before letting his idealism get the better of him." It was clear Ashworth had stepped into a war with enemies who didn't wear uniforms or carry guns, but who controlled courts, newspapers, and men like Brennan. And they were now sending a message: back off, or you'll vanish, just like the girls you're trying to avenge. The situation had taken a turn. "Your Honor, if this is about an active case, I must remind you, this is highly irregular," Ashworth said, his hand drifting toward the holster at his side. There's nothing irregular about prominent members of the community showing concern for our institutions. Judge Cromwell responded coolly. St. Catherine's Academy has been a cornerstone of this city for over a decade. The women there have given their lives to care for the abandoned and the poor. It would be tragic if baseless allegations were to undo their years of service. He leaned in slightly, his voice losing its casual tone. I understand you've had conversations with Dr. Webb about his work. He's not a young man anymore, detective. His memory isn't what it used to be, and his files, well, documentation from those years is hardly reliable. It wouldn't do to let a fading memory tarnish a noble institution's legacy. The threat wasn't subtle. Dr. Webb's testimony would never see the inside of a courtroom, and any medical records would be discredited or lost. But Cromwell wasn't done. I've also heard you've been in contact with a Miss Emma Prescott, he said. She's had a rough time, recently lost her job, behind on rent, and let's just say her mental state has become a topic of concern. It would be unfortunate if her troubles got worse, because she chose to involve herself in things that don't concern her. A chill traced the back of Ashworth's neck. Are you threatening Miss Prescott? He asked sharply. Not in the slightest. The judge replied with mock innocence. Just stating the reality that people in fragile positions should be careful about the choices they make. Life has a way of getting harder very quickly. As he stepped toward the door, Cromwell paused. Detective Ashworth, you're not a fool. You know when you're staring at something much bigger than yourself. There are people behind this people who have power, and they will protect what's theirs. I'd hate to see a capable officer get crushed beneath ambitions he can't fulfill. Once Cromwell was gone, Ashworth sat silently in his study, weighing everything. It was no longer just a case. It was a web that reached deeper than he ever suspected. The men involved weren't just clients. They were the ones shaping the very laws and policies of the city, men in robes, men in boardrooms, men who had never heard the word consequence. But he also knew something else. Power breeds arrogance. These men had grown careless, certain. They were beyond reach. That confidence might be the flaw that unraveled them. At first light, Ashworth made a decision. He would no longer follow protocol. The system itself was infected. Instead of trusting the courts, he would take his findings to the press loudly, publicly, and fast. But before that, he had to ensure the safety of those who had helped him. He sent word to Emma, warning her of the danger and urging her to flee the city immediately. Then he paid another visit to Dr. Webb, asking him to hand over any remaining documents before they were confiscated or destroyed. The old physician, still trembling from his own visit by Cromwell's men, reluctantly agreed. But he refused to testify, saying he was too old and too frightened to face what might come. He would provide copies of his records, but his voice would remain silent. Now Ashworth raced against a ticking clock. The people he was hunting had already begun to erase their trail. The moment they sensed real danger, they'd strike back, and they wouldn't miss. What Ashworth didn't know was that his understanding of the conspiracy was still incomplete. The full scope of what had happened at St. Catherine's Academy had yet to be revealed, and then came the most unexpected visitor. On the night of November 15th, 1847, Sister Margaret Collins appeared at his doorstep shaking, terrified, and covered in blood. Her habit was torn, her face swollen and bruised. Her eyes were wide with horror, as if she had stared into death itself. Whatever she had witnessed inside the academy would not only confirm Ashworth's worst fears, but shatter every assumption he had made about the case and the truth behind the disappearance of those 24 girls. It was darker than anything he had imagined. If this story made your skin crawl, share it with someone who loves the darkest mysteries. Like the video, subscribe to stay updated, and prepare yourself, because what Sister Margaret was about to reveal would leave you breathless. Ashworth had just cracked open his front door when she stumbled inside, wild-eyed and breathless. "Detective Ashworth," she panted, her voice thick with panic. "They're going to kill me. They found out I've been speaking to you, and they'll do to me what they did to the others." Without hesitation, Ashworth ushered her into the safety of his home, locking the door behind them. She collapsed into the nearest chair, trembling, her face pale and her hands clenched tightly. In her lap, "My name isn't Margaret Collins," she finally said, her accent once thick with Irish lilt vanishing into a flat New England drawl. "It's Martha Caldwell, and I'm not a nun." She looked up, shame and fear battling in her eyes. "None of us were," she continued. "We were criminals, all of us. Murderers hiding behind a facade of holiness. That school was never about helping children. It was about exploiting them." Martha began to unravel the long-kept truth about the institution known as St. Catherine's Academy. She, along with Victoria Whitman and Agnes Murphy, had met nearly 2 decades earlier behind the walls of the Massachusetts Women's Prison. Each had landed there for different crimes: fraud, theft, and in Agnes's case, murdering her husband for a life insurance payout. Victoria was the brains, Martha said quietly. She came from a wealthy family, had a real education, knew how to carry herself like a lady. She could convince anyone of anything. Once they were all released in early 1834, Victoria presented them with a plan. She had learned of 3 Irish nuns: Sister Catherine Morrison, Sister Mary Frances, and Sister Teresa Walsh, who were journeying to Massachusetts to establish a Catholic orphanage. These women were traveling alone, carrying official documents and substantial church funds. "We intercepted them when they arrived in Boston," Martha whispered. "We told them we were fellow believers wanting to help them get to Salem. But the women never made it there." "They were never going to," Martha admitted, barely able to meet Ashworth's eyes. "We killed them on a stretch of road just outside of the city. Took everything: papers, money, even their names. Buried them in a shallow grave near Marblehead and set their belongings on fire. With their stolen habits and forged identities, the trio arrived in Salem, posing as the original sisters. No one questioned them. Few in Protestant New England understood Catholic protocol well enough to doubt them. They were welcomed with open arms, lauded for their devotion and their mission to aid orphaned children. At first, we did try," Martha said, her voice choked. "We really tried to make it into a real orphanage, but Victoria, she saw something more profitable. It started with a single request. A wealthy man from Boston approached Victoria, asking to adopt a girl under suspicious terms. He offered money far more than any donation or sponsorship would bring in. From there, it escalated," Martha said. "Victoria realized there were powerful men willing to pay enormous sums for young girls who had no one to protect them. They selected girls who were completely alone, those without family, friends, or any connections. Girls who could vanish without causing suspicion. The community was easily fooled. Mother Superior Victoria was trusted, revered. She simply claimed the girls had been adopted into loving homes. But the truth was far darker. What began as secretive, one-off transactions soon evolved into a complex network. The school turned into a procurement center, feeding girls into brothels stretching from Boston to Providence. Over time, it became more than that. It became a place where girls were conditioned, molded into submission. The basement wasn't for sewing or baking, Martha admitted, her face contorted with guilt. It was a training ground, a place where we broke their spirits. We taught them to obey, to surrender their sense of self, to accept that their bodies were no longer theirs. Those who rebelled were punished cruelly. Beatings, isolation, public humiliation. Escape attempts were met with brutal consequences to serve as warnings to others. I never imagined it would go this far, Martha said, her voice almost inaudible. But I was a part of it. I let it happen. I helped it happen. Tears slid silently down her cheeks as Ashworth sat frozen, the full weight of what she had just confessed settling over him like a shroud. New arrivals were deliberately broken down. Isolated from the rest of the girls, they were subjected to escalating punishments until they no longer resisted. Those deemed especially attractive or well-mannered were selected for specialized instruction, groomed to serve the wealthiest and most particular of clients. Victoria maintained detailed records. Martha confessed lists of clients and their specific, often disturbing, preferences. Some men sought girls who resembled their own daughters. Others asked for girls who reminded them of deceased wives. There were clients who paid more to see a girl cry, and others who paid more if she didn't. But the most horrifying truths emerged when Martha spoke of what happened to the girls who became pregnant, contracted illnesses, or were simply no longer considered profitable. Dr. Webb's so-called treatments were meant to preserve the girls' marketability. But when that failed, they were disposed of. Victoria called it retirement, Martha said grimly. The word was grotesque in the context of what it actually meant: murder. Agnes would escort the girl to the basement, and they would never return. Victoria claimed they were being transferred to other institutions, but the truth was impossible to hide. Martha had smelled the smoke from the crematorium, had seen the ash scattered in the garden behind the academy. Martha estimated that over 60 girls had met this fate in the 13 years the academy had been operating. Some were killed immediately once they became inconvenient. Others died from prolonged abuse. Some were murdered for threatening to speak out. As for the 24 girls Ashworth had been investigating, they're not missing, Martha said. They're dead. Every single one of them. Victoria had recorded all their names not out of guilt, but pride. She considered them her crowning achievements, the girls who had brought in the most money before they were eliminated. But the real shock came when Martha revealed the scale of the operation. It wasn't confined to St. Catherine's. Victoria had created a network across the region, connecting with similar operations in other states: Connecticut, Rhode Island, even Philadelphia. They traded girls, shared high-paying clients, assisted one another in covering up evidence. It's not just this place, Martha told him. There are dozens. She had decided to come forward now because she had discovered that her own life was at risk. Her reluctance to continue participating in the most brutal parts of the operation had drawn suspicion, and she had overheard a conversation between Victoria and Agnes about how to arrange her death. I never wanted this, she said, voice trembling. At first, I thought we were just going to steal money. I never imagined we'd become this. I've helped kill children. I've destroyed lives. And I can't live with it anymore. Martha offered to give Ashworth everything he would need to take the network down. The site where the real nuns were buried, names and addresses of affiliated operations, transaction records, client rosters, and most critically, the location of the safe in Victoria Whitman's private rooms. It contained the most damning evidence: financial ledgers, client names, explicit photographs that some clients had paid extra for, letters exchanged with other institutions. Victoria believed holding on to this evidence made her untouchable, that it gave her power over powerful men. But it also made her vulnerable. As Martha concluded her confession, Ashworth began to grasp the true magnitude of what he was up against. This was the largest organized abuse scandal the state had ever known. And it wasn't just criminals, it was respectable men with influence and reach, who would stop at nothing to protect themselves. If he moved quickly, he might be able to collect the evidence, make it public, and expose the full scope of the horror before those involved silenced him and Martha forever. Time was running out. But he owed it to the girls who had died at St. Catherine's to try. They deserved to be remembered not as the anonymous victims of a hidden industry, but as children failed by a world that should have protected them, ***. At dawn on November 16, 1847, a decisive operation was launched against St. Catherine's Academy. Rather than involving his own department, tainted by corruption, Detective Ashworth turned to the Massachusetts State Police and federal marshals, both unconnected to the local criminal network. What they uncovered during the raid was far worse than anyone had anticipated. Inside Victoria Whitman's personal safe, authorities found meticulous records documenting the trafficking of 127 girls over a span of 13 years. 68 of those girls had been killed once deemed no longer profitable, including 24, whose tragic fates would later become the symbol of the entire scandal. Even more shocking was the client list. Not only did it include local figures from Massachusetts, but it also named powerful individuals from across New England and New York. The roster exposed 3 federal judges, a dozen state lawmakers, 5 city mayors, and numerous influential businessmen and clergy. Ultimately, the scandal would stretch all the way to a sitting member of Congress and a cabinet official. Victoria Whitman was apprehended while attempting to escape to Canada with a suitcase filled with gold and jewels payments collected from her clientele. Agnes Murphy was caught in the Academy's basement, trying to incinerate records and evidence in the same crematorium where countless victims had perished. The man known as Father Alley vanished without a trace and was never located. The trials that followed became some of the most explosive in the history of Massachusetts. Despite the overwhelming mountain of proof, Victoria Whitman insisted on her innocence, claiming she had merely run a lawful orphanage and was the victim of an elaborate smear campaign. Her pleas were dismissed. She was found guilty on 68 counts of murder and sentenced to die. Agnes Murphy, who argued she had acted under Whitman's control, was shown to have taken a leading role in the operation's most brutal acts. She was found guilty of 43 murders and also sentenced to death. Martha Caldwell, who chose to cooperate with authorities, received life imprisonment. She spent the next 32 years in the Massachusetts State Prison for Women and eventually became known for teaching literacy to her fellow inmates. Dr. Webb, the Academy's physician, faced a choice: assist in the investigation or face trial himself. He chose the former, providing vital medical documentation that confirmed patterns of abuse and homicide. Though convicted as an accessory and given a 20-year term, he died of a heart attack less than 2 years into his sentence. The effort to prosecute the Academy's wealthy clientele was far more difficult. Many of the men named in Whitman's files used their wealth to secure elite legal representation or used political influence to hinder the investigation. Some disappeared, others destroyed incriminating evidence, and several simply denied involvement. Even when the proof was compelling, one of the most dramatic moments came when Judge Harrison Cromwell was discovered dead in his study, just 3 days before his scheduled testimony, in apparent suicide to avoid disgrace. Similar fates met several others, leading some to believe they had been silenced to prevent further exposure of the network. Ultimately, justice reached only a fraction of those involved. Just 12 of the more than 50 named clients were ever successfully tried and convicted. The rest evaded accountability, protected by money, influence, or the unwillingness of authorities to confront powerful figures. The crimes, however, left behind indisputable traces. Excavations uncovered bone fragments and personal items from victims inside the Academy's crematorium. A mass grave outside Marblehead revealed the bodies of 3 legitimate nuns and other unidentified remains. Public rage boiled over before justice could finish its course. An angry mob burned the Academy to the ground, destroying the final vestiges of a place once believed to offer sanctuary. Emma Prescott, once celebrated for her role in uncovering the horrors at St. Catherine's Academy, quickly learned that public praise could be fleeting and dangerous. Though her actions brought justice, many saw her as the reason powerful reputations were ruined. Threats followed her, some anonymous and others frighteningly direct, all from people who believed she should have stayed silent, fearing for her life. Emma left Massachusetts and settled in California under a different name, living in obscurity until her death in 1891. The fallout from the Academy scandal wrought real change. In Massachusetts, stricter laws were introduced to oversee orphanages and charitable institutions. These regulations enforced routine inspections, demanded transparent record-keeping, and required proper vetting of staff. The ripple effect spread across New England as neighboring states adopted similar reforms, determined to prevent future tragedies like the one in Salem. But among the most powerful results of the investigation was the restoration of dignity to the forgotten. The mystery of the 24 missing girls that first launched the investigation was finally solved. These children, once hidden behind silence and official lies, were given names and voices again. Mary O'Brien, just 13, was murdered in 1837 while trying to escape. Sarah Thompson, 15, succumbed to tuberculosis in 1839 without receiving proper care. Catherine Murphy, only 12, was killed in 1840 after defying a client's abuse. Alongside them were 21 more girls, aged 12 to 17, each with a heartbreaking story of a life stolen too soon. A monument now stands in Salem's Green Lawn Cemetery, etched with all their names and funded by members of the public who refuse to forget. The stone bears the message, in memory of the innocent victims of St. Catherine's Academy. May their names never be forgotten. May their suffering never be repeated. Detective William Ashworth, who exposed the full scope of the crime, earned a promotion and later became Boston's chief of police. He dedicated the rest of his life to uncovering similar abuse in other institutions. Though he never married, his work became his legacy. Yet, he carried a heavy burden until his death in 1889, haunted by the thought that he might have uncovered the truth sooner. The old academy was never rebuilt. The site remained untouched for years until it was turned into a peaceful park, place where children could finally be safe. Some say that on quiet nights, you can hear faint voices there, songs sung by the lost girls. Now at peace. The story of St. Catherine's Academy continues to draw interest. The case file is still one of the most accessed at the Massachusetts State Archives. Historians, writers, and crime researchers keep searching for answers, wondering if all the truth was ever revealed. Could there have been other victims? Other hidden institutions? Other guilty men who slipped away? What remains certain is this: the cruelty at St. Catherine's wasn't fueled by myths or monsters. It wasn't supernatural. It was real human evil. It came from people who chose their own power and gain over the safety of innocent children. These were caretakers who betrayed the very trust they were given, hiding behind religion and respectability. The girls who were lost finally found peace, not through ghost stories or legends, but through the bravery of those who made sure they wouldn't disappear from memory. Thanks to Emma Prescott and Detective Ashworth, their names are preserved in stone, a lasting testament to the fact that even the voiceless deserve to be heard, and even the forgotten deserve justice. This case serves as a grim reminder. True horror often wears the face of the familiar. It hides behind polished doors within systems we trust. The most dangerous villains aren't always strangers. They're sometimes those meant to protect us.